been out in the field and I've been talking to people about this and trying to get a handle about what it means. I've been listening to information as it dripped out, and the information dripped out a little bit at a time, and it got worse and worse. There was the memo, and then it was, holy cow, one of the big companies settled for $53 million. And then another company settled for $83 million. And everyone started to go, what does this mean? And then we were even a little bit more unnerved because we knew they had settled for money, but we didn't know what the terms were that they had settled for. And then we kind of dribbled out a little bit. We knew what the terms they had settled for were. And then the memo came, and we were trying to wade our way through what all this meant for all of you. And philosophically, I don't really care what it means. What I care far more for all of you is what does it practically mean in your day-to-day business. So I've had some interesting conversations, and I'm going to tell you what it means for all of you. But the best comment I got was from a guy who was sitting in the back of one of my classes, and he said, after we talked about this, and we went through the whole rigmarole, and we talked about this and what he was going to have to do, and how he was going to have to change his business and all of this stuff. And he looked at me in the eye and he said, well, I don't like it. But I do like to get paid. So I guess I'm going to have to learn how to do it. And I thought that was probably the best response I had gotten. Because so often, especially for so many faces I know that from you, you've been in business long enough to know change comes. And you've already adapted to changes before in many different ways. I was sitting with Ryan Gable, I was showing him the book. Hey Ryan, would you hand me that book? I was showing him the book. We found these when we were excavating some of our treasures. Do any of you know what this book is?
Yes.
Okay, that means that you've been in business a long time. A long time. A long time. For those of you who don't know what this is the original MLS. Okay, the original MLS.
It's like the Declaration of Independence.
It's like, so holy moly, we have learned to adapt to change. I remember my first broker saying to me, DOS is just like a file cabinet. You'll get used to using it, it's just like a file cabinet. Oh, good grief. And so we're going to get used to doing this as well. So here's what this means to you. You're going to have, and this is my opinion, so I'll try to tell you what my opinion is. Please read the disclaimer too, because we're going to be careful how we talk today. But here's what I think it's going to mean to you. You're all going to have to learn how to use buyer's agreements. Get over yourselves, get used to it. I'm going to tell you, I trained people years ago on baby agents on how to do them, and here's the trick of it. I trained them how to do it. They went out in the field, and you know what happened? They got them signed. You know when they stopped getting them signed? It was when you said to them, we don't do that business that way. We don't get them signed that way. And they said, oh good, we don't have to do it anymore. But until then, they were happily getting them signed. So I know that with the proper training and the proper attitude and the proper skills, they signed them. And they were signing them with compensation in them. So it's a matter of you're going to have to learn a new skill. You're going to have to learn how to get a buyer's agreement signed. Yeah, I see that face you're making about that. I see it. I see it on the line. You're all looking at me like, and here's the nice part. Here's the nice part about it. You've got some grace here. You've got warning. You got some warning, so you have some time. So you have time to do one of two things: to stand here like this and say, I don't want to. I'm not gonna. No, I don't like it. I'm not gonna. I'm not. And okay, it's going to work for a while, because probably things will go along just the way they go along, and you'll have this grace period and this grace period. I'm starting to stand my back to you, and this grace period and this grace period. And then one day, you know what'll happen? You won't have it anymore. You will have to rely on the fact that you need buyer's agreements. And for those of you who have been practicing and studying and doing it and getting and taking your courage in your hands and doing it, you'll have gotten it accomplished. For those of you who kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, that's when you're going to fall off the cliff. So I'm glad you're here today, because that's what you need to get used to. The idea is you need to be able to get buyer's agreements signed. They are not poison. So I'm going to give you 3 assignments right now. The first one is, how many of you have clearly read and understand a buyer's agreement? Raise your hand. Well, good for you. Well, I've read it. How many of you could clearly explain it to a buyer? Not bad. That's pretty good. How many of you could also explain the value of them signing it?
That's the way to get it signed.
That's the way to get it signed, and we'll talk about that a little bit toward the end. That's the way to get it signed. So those of you who can say that, you're already ahead of the game. The rest of you, I'm going to say, you better go read the doggone agreement. Because what you're afraid of, someone's going to say to you, what does this mean? What does this say? Why should I sign it? And they're going to say, what if I don't sign it? And we'll talk about some of the people saying some of those things toward the end of this. What? Then you don't have any representing me. And you're also going to have to be brave enough to say, if you don't want me to represent you, then go find some poor schnook who will represent you. So you're going to have to take your courage in your hands in a couple of different ways. Okay? It's going to be tricky. I'm not in any way saying this is an easy transition to make. It's going to be hard. It's always hard when you have to change the way you do business. It's always hard. But it's possible, and I have faith that we can do this and we can make this change as well. And we can do it with some grace and some polish.
Deborah, are you able to summarize the terms of the agreements that you just mentioned? The settlements that you just mentioned?
A little. Okay, the ones that I know about. Number one, and some of the things that put fear into people's heart. Good question. I'm going to ask you, the last question, I'm going to ask you to save some of your questions, but good, because it's sort of what happened. One is that none of you do anything for free anymore. Would you stop using that doggone free word? Stop saying free. I've been harping about this for a while now. Nothing is free. Another one is, I'm going to, correct me if I don't get them all, Jeffrey, the ones I'm talking about. The other one is, well, let me back up even a little bit more. One of the reasons this whole nonsense started was because, I was reading again about it, because yesterday they were talking to the people who started all this nonsense. It wasn't that they were complaining about it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that the seller had to pay this buyer, who was essentially their adversary in this transaction. That wasn't fair, and it was an antitrust violation. And when they started looking at how the payers were paying, there was a lot of conformity between companies on how those payers were doing. So one of the things they want is that you not say free anymore. One of the companies has said that we're going to let any of our people not have to belong to NAR if they don't want to. This is what struck fear into a lot of people's hearts. But here's the interesting deal. And Jeff, you can pitch in a little on this if you want, but here's the interesting thing. Many associations are owned through the associations by NAR. We aren't one of those. So hold that thought, just hold that over there on the side for a minute. We aren't one of those. What do you all need to have to do, what's your biggest tool that you all use? MLS. What do you have to do to get MLS? To belong to an association. Could you all drop out of an association right now? Well, not if your company doesn't do it, but if you wanted to just go get a license in Illinois, could you?
Yes.
And be a licensed realtor in Illinois?
Yes.
You always had that ability to do that. There was never anything stopping you from doing that. So really that's nothing different. So there was a lot of talk about, well, my company, people can leave if they want to leave. And I said, well, that's just a lot of, when really people can't go because what do they have to have? Access to MLS. So certainly here in Northern Illinois, I don't know that that's a big concern that they can all just immediately say, we're leaving NAR and we're not going to go there, okay? One of the other things is, you saw that MRED, gosh bless them, they are a fine multiple listing service. As anybody, and I've heard this again and again as I've been out talking, as anybody who belongs to an MLS any place else in the country will say, holy cow, MRED is the cream of the crop. They were smart enough to say, we don't ever want to be embroiled in any one of these lawsuits. So we're going to be a little proactive about this instead of waiting for someone to say, here's a law here, we're serving you with a lawsuit as well, because we think you're embroiled in the same kind of antitrust stuff. That's why they immediately sent you all the Halloween memo to say, sellers can choose what they want to pay, okay? It was very smart on their part, because what it is, it was a preemptive, it was a way to prevent them from being attacked in that particular way. I think Rebecca Jensen, who runs MLS, is one smart cookie for doing that. and her board and all the people who did that.
Yeah,
Jeff,
I'm
may I?
gonna do two quick comments, because we'll let the experts talk about this, but two quick comments. First on the NAR thing. We're all realtors, and the ability for NASBAR to use Realtor as their, for you members, and to get the benefits from NAR, there's something, it's called a three-way agreement. I'm not gonna get into the weeds here, but we don't have the option, when I say without some really big consequences, right, of saying, we're not gonna be a part of NAR anymore, okay? That's not an option for us. The reason that's important to you guys is that through, whether it be us or any of the other local associations around here, that's the only way for you to gain access to EMRA, okay? And there's a couple of reasons for that. Main reason is that the associations were the ones that originally helped create the MLS, put the money in, the resources, et cetera, to do that. So, when, as Deborah suggested, there are a couple of parts in the country, by the way, Southern California, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, where the courts have ruled that non-realtors have to have access to the MLS. So in those parts of the country,
Licensed non-realtors.
well, yeah, it's always licensed. It's always licensed people. But the issue there, believe it or not, it's not been this great rush out of the realtor world over the years. Because those decisions have taken place quite a long time ago. Not been this great rush out. Now, that doesn't mean that won't happen now that these companies have said you don't have to be a part of NAR, and they may still be able to get that. The rest of the country, case law has been very consistent about you got to be, it's okay for the association to say you have to be a member in order to gain access. Also, in those parts of the country, they charge a lot more money for non-members to get in and all that neat stuff. Yes, sir.
Can I, as a member, if I chose to not be involved with NAR, can I buy my MLS access as a non-member?
Not to Emirates, you can't, no.
Not through here.
Not through any of these local associations. Not through any of it. And it has to do with MRED's operating agreement. They're an LLC, so they have an operating agreement rather than bylaws. And their bylaws, their operating agreement clearly states that the way people gain access to them is through the agreements they have with these local associations.
I'm
Yes.
guessing it has to do with that history and that they committed to supporting the existence and the ongoing existence of these associations.
Well, yeah, when this all came together for MRED back in 2008, again, without getting into the weeds, yeah, the associations were part of it, and the associations, in order to give brokers ownership, said, fine, we'll back away, but we still have to have something in place to make sure, and NASBAR is one of the 7 founding associations that are left, and we're part of that decision making. The other thing you mentioned real quick, MRED. The reason they went to and made the declaration on the 0% and $0 compensation was it was on advice of their legal counsel to do it. And the reason they did it is because they feel it's their best argument against any damages continuing to occur if there's any lawsuit decisions that are negative, because as we know, the copycat suits, right? They're going to wait until decisions, and then they may get sued now. They may get sued after the fact. So again, it was $1 before, it's 0 now. I'm going to leave that to you guys to talk about. But all I'm saying is that was the reason, that was the catalyst for, the Halloween decision. Oh,
Well,
Sorry.
and just so you understand, if all of the people who are suing prevail on this, this was the number that struck terror into my heart. By the time they are done with the damages and then the compensatory damages, they're looking at $40 billion. I mean, what they're looking at is so. Close your ears, Jeffrey, because I'm going to say a bad thing about attorneys.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to pretend it's all
About class action attorneys.
Class action attorneys, there they go, that's what it is.
Not real estate attorneys.
Not real estate attorneys. I just see that $40 billion, it's like going blink, blink, blink in my mind to see how attractive that would be to anybody. So I think MRED made a brilliant proactive decision about doing that. I know it's hard for you, I understand it's painful, but I think the decision was a good one. There may be some other ones coming, because that's been the hardest thing, honestly, to figure out what the other things that they promised to do were. That's been the trickiest thing. What I'm gonna say to you, and I'm gonna try to be as short as this is. The other thing that I ended up, the other man that I ended up falling in love with in one of these presentations, because I've had a lot of people sitting here telling me why this is stupid and I don't like it and complaining and whining. Sorry, it's not what you, but doing this to me. And there was an older man in the back row, and he sat up and he said something trainers hate to hear. I got something I want to say. Oh. And I thought, oh, what could this? Really, you just hate when people say that to you. And he stood up and he said, well, I've been doing this a long time. Yet again, a phrase too that you don't want to hear often. And he turned and he said, I think this is great for the industry. I think this is going to make us return to a level of professionalism we haven't seen in years. We are going to have to tell people what we do for them. We're going to have to tell them why we're professional. We're going to have to act in professional ways. We have let those crummy buyers, those were his words, not mine, those crummy buyers boss us around and make us do things we shouldn't do. As in, come open the door for me and let me in the house. We are not going to be able to afford to do that anymore. We're going to have to sit them down and tell them what we do for them so that they sign the buyer's agreement. Those of you who still knew what that black book was all about, you remember we used to do that? You remember that's the way we used to do business? Once a week. Well, the book's once a week, that came once a week, but do you remember we used to actually have people come in our offices and sit down and, oh, here was a novel idea. Talk to them about what we did for them before we ever showed them a house. That's what we're going to have to return what we do for those buyers again. And we're just going to have to get good enough to make them mine. I don't know how else to say it, but we're going to have to be good enough to make them mine so they understand our value again. We've given way too much of our power away to let people just boss us around and say, come on, show us the house at 1 o'clock. No, not anymore. So we're just going to have to really rethink and retrain, and really and truly, and retrain like crazy on how to get them back and doing that sort of thing. I'm going to introduce my first guest. Because I told you I wouldn't take this much time, I'm sorry. My first guest is, well, I have two guests that I really love. Brian Jessen is one of the best lenders that I know, and Jeffrey Marks is one of the best lenders that I know. And you know what? I know one of those attorneys, sorry.
I don't lend anybody.
He won't even lend his kids money.
Yes, that's a fair one.
A Lendoneer. One of the reasons that I asked both of them to be here is when I got the Halloween memo, I sat at my desk for a minute, then I went over and talked to Michael Gadzik for a minute and said, what on earth am I going to do about this? Because I knew this was going to be a special project. And I yapped and I finally said, you know, I'm not alone in this. There are going to be other people who are going to be involved in this. There are lenders who are going to be involved, and there are attorneys who are going to be involved. And so I picked up the phone, and I picked up the phone to Jeffrey, and I picked up the phone to Brian, and both of them spent an hour with me wading our way through what this was going to be. So the first thing I'm going to tell you before they talk is, you've got lenders there and you've got attorneys out there who have no idea about the Halloween memo. Well, you got realtors out there, but shame on them. They at least got the memo. The attorneys and the lenders did not get the memo. They have no idea that this has happened. So it's going to be up to you to educate the people you work with that this has happened. So it doesn't come as a big surprise at the closing table or whenever you need them. You've got to be the educators on this. So Brian, will you talk about what this means in terms of lending? And then I'll ask Jeffrey if he'll talk about this in terms of closing and the transaction, what that means. You're up.
I mean, basically, so now the buyers are going to pay, right, to have representation, which I always thought was a good idea, even as a consumer. So I thought, isn't that kind of odd that the person that's representing me is actually getting paid by the seller? Which I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So as a consumer, I always thought, well, this actually makes sense because now you have to explain your value and your expertise. Because for me, I'd go onto like Realtor.com and Zillow and stuff. You look up a house, there's like wide value differences, right? When you go online and look at a house and all your expertise of neighborhoods, what happened to that house? One house is newly finished in a cheap way. One house is newly finished really nicely, high quality. The average consumer just sees a newer renovated house. They don't even know what those differences are and like levels of finishes and stuff. So I think, before I talk about lending, I think that's actually gonna, if you can, educate the buyers to your value proposition, I think it's actually going to be good. And even for me, if I have a client that's, and you can clearly tell they don't care who their lender is or whoever's the least expensive, or they're going online, they're talking to 8 lenders. I'm like, they don't see the value proposition of me or perhaps somebody else that wants to get them fully pre-approved, really look at it. There's somebody out there right now, they're out there making offers and I haven't pre-approved them yet. And I have no, like, I can't even believe the listing agent is taking, whether it's me or somebody else, they're not even taking, they're taking their bidding and going back and forth, and they have no pre-approval letter, like a real legit pre-approval letter. So I think it's just when you show that, you're going to show at the closing, you know, this is going to be the amount. And I don't know exactly how this is all going to lay out from the seller's side, but I do have this thing to pass out, which just talks about closing cost credits. Like if you're able to convince the seller to give them a credit, there's certain limits that are allowed, and if they exceed the actual cost of the transaction, and we allow title fees and real estate tax credits. Let me pass that out, you guys can pass it around. Real estate tax credits, you can pay your insurance at closing, you can do all these things to kind of increase that amount. But if it exceeds that whole amount of title fees, real estate fees, you know, real estate transfer taxes, your escrows, all this stuff you sort of kind of put in there to build up that credit. If it exceeds that, it has to be a reduction in purchase price. So you can actually make that a pretty large number if you counsel people properly that all this stuff can be put on the closing statement. But from our standpoint, it's not going to affect anything other than that's just another buyer charge. There's a buyer charge sitting on the closing statement. They're going to pay 2% or 2.5% or whatever it is that's agreed to. And it may vary between people, but it's not going to affect our lending. The only part that's going to affect our lending is if there is a credit from the seller that exceeds the actual whole cost of all these things I mentioned. And we can send you an email that lists literally all the things that are allowed that you can put on there. As long as it's paid at the closing, all that stuff can total a number. And if it exceeds that number, you have to reduce the purchase price as a lender.
Can I interject here? I've been told, and you can speak about this, that it's not going to be an allowable fee on a VA transaction, but it is allowed on jumbos, conventionals, and FHA.
FHA, yeah, VA hasn't determined that yet, but that's what they're leaning towards, that they won't allow that. Because there's usually 0% down transactions, so we'll see how that lays out, but that's currently where their position is.
Okay. So expect some movement on that in the future, because obviously that's not going to be a sustainable position.
But I think the biggest thing from our side is, okay, if you're going back to the seller and trying to get a credit to cover your fee or part of your fee, it's going to be part of that whole number that's allowed as a closing cost credit based on that piece of paper that I gave you. So that's probably going to be the biggest thing on our side, because then also you have a reduction of purchase price, then you have lower the loan amount, or all of a sudden you're above a certain loan to value. Let's say theoretically you're 80%, now the purchase price has been reduced, now you're 80% of this number, or do you go higher and go into, we get private mortgage insurance because now you're at 85% or 82%. So that's the part that from the lender standpoint that you'll see, you have to have somebody that can clearly explain all the cost of the transaction, and then if you're able to get something from the seller to help offset this fee, then it has to, if it exceeds all those bundle of numbers, and obviously transfer taxes vary a lot, right? There's one in Lake Forest, there's one in Wilmette, there's one in Chicago, there's one in Lincolnshire. So some places don't have any municipal transfer tax at all. And then in Chicago, there's for the buyer and the seller. So anyway, so that's probably the biggest
Question.
thing at this point.
Do you wrap the commission into the mortgage? Is that what you're doing?
No, I mean, that's just a fee someone's paying, like they'll pay title fees, or they'll pay their real estate attorney, or they'll pay, you know, they'll put the escrows in for taxes. I mean, there'll just be a whole number of charges, and that's gonna be one of the charges.
It'll just be a line item on the master settlement statement.
Yeah. So, but again, it can't exceed the actual overall, that number that you get, if you get a credit from the seller, it can exceed that number. It just, if it exceeds all those costs, then that's gonna be a reduction in purchase price, which would affect the loan as far as either the loan amount or the loan to value.
Was your point in this that you can negotiate a credit and have it be used as the buyer agency fee where it's being represented as something else? I'm not clear.
No, it's just another fee that's showing on the transaction, but that's what's allowed for the seller to give them as a percentage give, or what they will give, but in a particular type of transaction, they're allowed to give that amount.
It's the question I'm getting asked most often is, can we ask for a buyer fee and have it appear as a credit? So like during my attorney review letter, when I send that letter out, can I ask for a credit? And, as a general rule, I think as attorneys, we stayed out of the commission, issues, because really commission wasn't an issue for the buyer because it was being paid for by the seller. So by talking about commission or asking about commission during attorney review, are we really representing our buyer or are we representing the agent? And so that was a big no-no, because we are representing the buyer, not the agent. So we weren't raising those types of issues. But now that it's potentially in a transaction a buyer charge, it's fair game for us to ask for a credit, just like we'd ask for a credit for anything else. The problem is, as you guys all know, it's difficult enough to get credits through on a master statement at a closing to begin with, because there's a limitation as to the amount of credits that you're allowed to get. And so now we're going to have a relatively large credit that's going to be competing with the other types of credits that we normally have on a closing statement, like, for repairs and things like that. So, normally, let's say we'd have a limit of 3% as a maximum credit anyway. So now, really what we're looking at is we're going to be, trying to ask for potentially, a credit for the commission, which might be 2% or 2.5% or whatever. And then we have a very small little margin then to ask for credits for other things such as repairs. So I anticipate this is going to be a big problem unless they start raising the percentages that we're allowed to have on these loans for credits. Instead, what you're going to probably see is a lot of shenanigans with, the tax credits increasing, or last minute price changes, prices decreasing, sales price decreasing and stuff like that, or just attorneys saying, sorry, the lender's not allowing it, we're not going to give it.
And you can build in a
closing.
little bit to the closing, to the real estate tax proration, but if it's widely different than what the taxes are.
Well, you can't
lenders
though.
are
It's a TRID violation to do it, so you can't. I mean, it's a convenient bucket that, you can throw a little bit of money in because the lenders don't count it towards some of their other numbers. So traditionally, attorneys in the past have increased the tax credits in an effort to resolve, last minute walkthrough issues, typically, but you can't really legally, it's a TRID violation, so you can't do it. It's not good practice. That's why the contract says any credits that aren't allowed by the lender will not be provided. And that's straight up right in the contract. So that's why there's that blank right on the first page of the contract, we put in the amount of credits. And, it says right there specifically that if this credit is disallowed by the lender, then it's not to be provided at the time of closing. And we're going to run into a lot of that.
I'm confused about two things. Number one, the real estate tax proration is what you're talking about? That's not really enough to move the needle to begin with.
Well, it can be. I mean, so
set that aside.
Well, I think that's a misconception, but okay.
Whether you go up 10% or down 10%, it's not enough to really move the needle when you're talking about a 2.5% commission ask. And why in the world would a seller provide a 2.5% commission just because you put it in a letter?
I think it'll be.
All right, can we hang on, let me back up here a minute. Let me back up a minute. All right, let me back up a minute. I'm getting real nervous about talking about how many percentage we're talking about here.
Forgetting about the percentage.
I want to forget about the percentages. The bottom line is, we're talking about the buyers. I want to back up and talk about the sellers for a minute first. All right, I need a little bit more background on both of this, because it is now going to be, you will have to, and nobody likes this, but this is Illinois law as well. You're going to have to give the seller clear definition on what they can pay out now. So in Illinois law always said if I was taking a 25% commission at Deborah DeBoer's real estate company, a ridiculous amount, and I was going to pay out nothing, I had to tell the seller that I was taking this ridiculous amount of money and paying out nothing. They had to know, the seller had to know that. All right, that's Illinois law, that has to be. But now we're also going to have to tell the seller something else. We're going to have to tell the seller that they have an option now. We can't say, well, what Deborah DeBoer always says is she takes 25% and divides it in half. No. We have to say to the seller, they now have another option here. They have the option of paying me something as Deborah DeBoer, the listing agent company, but they have the option of paying Susie Smith's company $0. And we're gonna have to tell the sellers that. There's gonna have to be transparency in that.
100%.
100%. So hang on a second, let me finish, because I lose train of thought for a while, pretty easily. So we're gonna have to tell them that. So one of the scripts you're going to have to learn from the seller side is, how am I gonna handle that with the seller? And here's what you cannot say to the seller. I'm gonna give you the non-answer first. Well, traditionally, we've always done it this way, so we're just gonna keep doing it traditionally the way we've always done it. And big wrong answer. Huge wrong answer. Big wrong answer. What you can say is something different, but it is a very nuanced, and you have to be very careful with this answer. Okay? The answer is this. I'm going to list your house. It may make your house more attractive to the buyer if you continue to pay out a co-op fee.
Yes.
Listen to what I say.
100%.
It may make your house more attractive to the buyer if you continue to pay out a co-op fee. Not to the buyer's agent, not to the buyer's company, but to the buyer. See the difference there?
Right, and I suspect that that's going to give a lot of traction, at least for a while. I think that there's a whole generation or multiple generations of people that are accustomed to paying the larger commission and to believe that the customary, conventional wisdom that it may help them sell their house quicker or for more money to do that. So I think, especially with the older generation, that is now in the downsizing or, aging out, I think a lot of those are not gonna have a problem with it. I think the youngest generation that's just getting into buying houses now is where we're gonna really have
That's a
that
really
issue.
interesting thing I've heard a couple times now, Jeffrey. Interestingly enough, I've heard people who are selling first-time home buyers, the agents who are selling to first-time home buyers, and the first-time home buyer says to them, what do I owe you? Yeah, what do I owe you? They don't really understand how this works, so they're actually saying, what do I have to give you to do this?
So they even do sometimes with the earnest money, they're like, oh, that actually goes towards my down payment? They think it's like a fee to.
Yeah, they
to
don't
put a
really
bid in.
kind of understand that, so
Right.
there's some difference
They
there.
actually are, in effect, the buyers are paying the commission.
All the time.
They're paying it in the price.
Always,
Exactly.
somewhere.
It's just
100%.
what exact's
Right.
coming out.
And so here's-
Explain that to them.
So you are in an unenviable position right now because you are in a market where there are still multiple offers. We would not be having the same conversation if you weren't having so many multiple offers. If you were in a different market, this wouldn't be such a big hoop-de-doo because people wouldn't be saying, well, I've got 6 offers, so I'm not giving you anything, kind of thing with this. So there's the,
I was just
Right,
gonna
but-
bring that up, because I'm like, you can see the market changing now. There should be still a lack of inventory, but with the rates so high and prices at the highest, people are starting to hesitate. Like, I've talked to multiple
Oh,
people
for sure.
lately that are like, I don't know, I don't feel so good. There was a realtor that was talking about how I'm talking to people, it's like, look, if this house is listed at 400,000 and you might have had to pay 430, 440 earlier this year, last year, year before, you might actually get this house for 375 now instead of 400. And you might get a mortgage that's higher than you like, but mortgages can be refinanced very easily. If we're like a year from now and rates are lower, that's very easy to do, right? So the price you pay for the house doesn't ever change. So he's actually talking to people as this market starts slowing down, how it's still a good time to buy a house because now you might have some negotiations power, like you said, and those sellers now, if the houses start sitting on the market longer, wouldn't they be more open
And
to paying that fee as the market slows down?
Even though we're in a multiple offer, we're in a seller's market, let's call it now, that doesn't mean that we're still not seeing signs of trouble on the sales side. There's a very large percentage, I read that over a third of all contracts are canceling before close. And I think that goes against the seller market. We have a seller market with multiple offers, but how many of those are illusory? How many of those actually get to close? And so I think that, again, especially if you can talk to the client and say to them, listen, you're now going to be competing against people that are offering 0 commission, to cover
To the
the buyer,
To the buyer.
for the buyer, to cover the buyer's commission costs, to their agent. If you offer a contribution to the commission costs of the buyer, then your house would hopefully sell quicker, or have it get into a more stable, contract or whatever it's going to be. So I think that's how, to talk about your point, why are we talking about this in a seller's market? I think that there's still a way to talk about it in a seller's market and convince the sellers that this is a smart move.
So the answer is conversations with the sellers are going to be almost as critically important as they will be with, and one of the reasons that I started by saying you got to all be reading Inman like crazy. Here's one of the reasons that I keep saying that. This stuff is filtering out into mainstream media. So your clients are hearing about this already. So I don't want you ever to be surprised by saying, well, I can just pay nothing now, or I can pay this. I don't want any of you to be surprised by anybody saying that to you. I want you to be proactive and you be the one saying it to them so that you don't sound shady and sneaky and all that kind of stuff. But again, watch your language so carefully. This is going to mean that you're going to have to really think your way through, how am I going to say this? How am I going to, it's going back to Real Estate 101, memorizing new ways to talk to people and be careful about what your words are carefully with people with this.
And mind you, by the way, if the lawsuit is not successful or if these other companies don't settle, this may all go back to the way it has been.
I hope so.
So you never know what's going to happen up here. You have some major companies that have settled, but who knows what the status of those settlements are going to look like in the event that this lawsuit falls apart, or gets dismissed or goes away.
All right, but don't be so hopeful. Don't spread false hope here because there's a whole bunch of other ones right behind them.
Well, I'm just saying.
I know.
We don't. This is very. This is like.
This is the test one.
This is very. It's very. We're walking into the unknown in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Here is, I guess, what I'm trying to say, and we don't understand exactly where this is going to wind up. Right now, we're trying to give you some direction. And it's like we're in the middle of a raging rapids, right? And we don't know exactly where we're going to wind up next, but we're hoping we're going to go to the left. We don't know exactly.
Trying to keep the boat upright.
Yeah, basically. So we're trying to give you guys the tools to to help you in this weird environment, because unfortunately the courts move very slowly, and there's going to be a lot of questions, and there's going to probably be a lot of changes over the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years.
Yes.
I've had a lot of questions in the last month that are floating through my head, so I'll try to remember them now. One thing in my perception has not been addressed is from the seller side, from the brokerage side, has there been any discussion about when we sign a listing agreement that if they don't want to pay a co-op commission, are the brokerages planning on reducing their fee?
Don't know yet. Don't know yet. Haven't gone down the road yet. Don't know.
Incentive to the buyer, right? Because the buyer's looking at your listing and they want to pay for that.
Right.
Wait,
That's
hold on,
100%.
Hold on, wait. Go ahead.
I just got to say one quick thing here, because we all kind of fall into this a little bit. You've read it in the articles that are out there. You've heard it even in testimony from these guys, at trial. When we start talking about the usual or the traditional or stuff like that, and I appreciate what we're trying to do. What you're trying to do is you're trying to, hey, there's an amount that you would normally find acceptable to share with a co-op, right, on a co-op. But you just, I'm saying to you, I'm not talking about these guys up here, I'm talking about you guys. You can't talk about traditional stuff, what you usually, and that's what Deborah was talking about earlier, because that's what's gotten us into this hot mess in the
So
first
Jeff,
place.
what happens when they go, well, what would you suggest they do?
Right, a recommendation isn't based upon.
Because isn't there going to be well, what do you're the experienced realtor,
Well,
what would you
The
recommend?
recommendation isn't based upon what everybody does, right? And that's the key. Oh, well, everybody, that's a great way to get yourself in hot water.
Right, what you can say is the minimum that I'm going to accept as a listing agent to list your property is 3%. If you would like to offer a
Could you
co-op
just stop
commission.
saying that number, please?
Yeah.
Just stop saying the number.
2%,
Just say
3%.
X number of dollars.
Well, whatever. I mean, it could just be
Whatever.
any dollar amount, but I mean, whatever you want to make as a, remember, you're an independent contractor, so you can set whatever that commission is, right? So let's say you decide that you want to make, you say the minimum that I want to make on this transaction commission is $5,000. Okay, I'm just throwing it. That's what they say. That's what I, as a listing agent, will. That's the minimum that I'm willing to take. If you want to pay any more than that, then what we can do is take that money and offer it, as a co-op commission. And that's something that, again,
I'm gonna
They can make that
I'm gonna
choice.
back up a little farther with this. Let me go back a little farther. This is me having the old managing broker stuff here. I don't know, talk to your managing broker. I'm sorry to say, I don't know what your managing brokers, how they're gonna handle that. We got managing brokers here in the office. I'm sorry for you guys. I have two of my favorites standing in the back row back there. I'm sorry. This is a problem you're gonna have to figure out. How are we gonna handle this in our offices? And the truth of the matter is, at this moment in time, I got nothing. But hold on just a minute. Let me stop for a second and let me talk about, I've talked about the conversations you're gonna have to have with the buyer or seller. Let me now go over here
Can I
and,
say one thing as a
Go
lender?
ahead. Go
So
ahead.
one thing I would recommend, whether you write the contract addendum or the attorney does, when you get through inspection, make sure the addendum says, whatever the amount of money is going to be given is going to be towards closing costs and prepaid items. Don't say repairs and don't say buyer's side commission. Make it general. Lenders hate it when you put repairs or if you put this charge on that addendum, and if you either have the attorney write it after the inspection or you write it as part of the contract, just make sure it's like towards prepaid items and closing costs.
Yeah, you should
Don't
never be
specify.
writing that stuff in a contract. Let the attorney do it. And that's the easiest way to tell if an attorney doesn't know what they're doing in a real estate transaction, is if on the addendum it says repair credit. Because that's,
Or this charge.
commission charge or whatever. Those are the kinds of things that are gonna cause a lot of problems. Lenders, that's why, when I work with
As a lender, when I send things to
Yeah.
underwriting, those kind of things are like very vague.
Right, sometimes I'll work with new brokers, right, new agents. And what they will do if they haven't been properly trained, they will send the inspection report and they'll copy the mortgage guy on the transaction, which is a huge mistake, right? Because the mortgage guy has an obligation, if they're underwriting the loan, if they see that there's necessary repairs, that lowers the value of the house, and then they can't technically lend based on the sales price until those repairs are completed. Because really what you're saying is, yes, this house is a $280,000 house, but there's a $5,000 credit. So if those repairs never get made, the house is only really worth $275,000, but the lender's lending based on $280,000, so it becomes a huge underwriting problem and causes issues with the loan, which is why you never include the lender or on those types of communications, and why when we do an addendum, we just call it a closing cost credit. And
Just
we
like
don't call
when
it repair
personal
credit.
items are left in the house, if they try to put it on there, we say there's no value to these items, even though there is a value to the items. From a lender standpoint, we like to, if you put the items on there, the patio furniture and the own, there's no value given to this part of the transaction. That's what that's
Right,
what a
and again,
lender-
they
an
do that
underwriter
because
wants.
it would lower, if they're saying that,
How much
yes.
is the patio furniture worth? How much
Right,
is the whatever?
right, is it worth this, and then how do they lend on that? Are they basing their loan on some sort of,
On the patio furniture.
on the patio furniture? They don't, it really lowers the price of the property, which lowers the amount that they can technically lend on the property. So that's why you never do that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
all right, wait,
Vague
come
and
back to me,
bland.
come back to me here a minute. I want to talk about what you need to do with your buyers now. Because this is the one that's gonna freak you out, is working with your buyers. So here we go with buyers agreements. Number one is, they don't want to come to your office anymore, I got that, they just don't want to. Thank God for Starbucks, because there's Starbucks all over the universe. So when someone calls and says, I want to see this house at 123 Elm Street, you say, come and meet me at Starbucks down on the corner. And if they won't meet you at Starbucks, I'm going to tell you, I'm really nervous about that, because maybe they'd want to murder you in the basement of the house that you're going to see. I don't like it, truly, from just simply a safety standpoint.
Yeah, maybe they're a Fed shopper.
Well, I don't care who they are, you shouldn't be meeting strangers in houses. So, get your language so you know how to make them meet you at least at Starbucks. How many of you, and I got good realtors here, so normally I don't get as many good hands. How many of you have as nice a presentation for buyers as you do for sellers? I'm telling you, it should be, every hand should be raised high and proud, and it wasn't in here. You need to have a buyer's questionnaire. What do I ask buyers? How do I get to know buyers? How do I bond with them? That's what you should be doing at Starbucks with them. And because if I just say, oh, here's the buyer's agreement, sign this, please, people are going to say, no, I don't want to. But if you and I have sat down for even 20 minutes and gotten to know each other, and I say, it is the way I do business, I do this buyer's agreement. Even if you say no to me, I say, well, okay, I can understand that we don't know each other well enough, but we're scheduled to go see 3 houses today. Let me go show you these 3 houses. And you know what we'll do? We'll audition today. I'll show you these 3 houses, and at the end of the day, if we agree we want to work together, then we'll revisit the idea of the buyer's agreement again. That's one way I can do this. Here's another way I can do this. Then all I'm going to ask you to do is sign the buyer's agreement for simply today. Just for today. So that if you see one of the houses today that you like, you agree to do the buyer's agreement just today.
Yeah, don't show a house without one.
Just,
Can I
they
ask you a
say,
question?
no, I don't want to sign a buyer's agreement. My first question to them would be this. Why not? Well, because I want to shop everybody in town. Well, okay then, nice knowing you, had a nice cup of
You
coffee
can
with you.
turn down people, right?
Yes, I can say, get out of here.
Well, you can actually turn this around to a positive. I mean, I think that you can sit with somebody, like, let's say you have a team, right? So traditionally, I see people as they grow in this industry and they start getting teams, and then agents will start focusing more on listings, and then they bring in maybe younger team members to start doing the buyers showings. You can even say to them, listen, I have tiers of service. You can say, I'll offer, if, once it becomes customary that people understand that the buyers are paying commission and buyers expect to pay a commission, you can discount and say, listen, if you want, I have a junior member on my team who can show you as many houses as you want. If you work with her, and it's a house that she shows you, then that would be at, this lower percentage. If you work with...
You're killing me, Jeffrey.
No, but I'm just saying, you can...
You're killing me, Jeffrey.
But you can
You're
do-
so far ahead of me.
I know.
I just got to get him to sign a buyer's agreement.
I know, but there's so many, but I'm trying to turn it around as a positive.
You're killing me,
And then
Jeffrey.
you can think of this as a marketing tool,
It's
as a
why I love
positive
him.
thing.
It's why I love him. Hold on. You've been so patiently waiting. What's your question?
So I don't have a question, I just want to, it's kind of like this, I'm a managing broker for Out Properties. I'm
God bless
in
you.
Falls. And what I tell my agents is that you are running your own business. You're an independent contractor. You have to have processes in place for buyers and sellers. You're running a business. Dress for the part you want, right? And if you don't have a buyer or seller process, and in this case, the buyer process now absolutely includes the buyer agreement, then how are people going to take you seriously? And if
Yes.
you lay it out,
Then why do you want to work for free?
and if
Potentially,
you
right?
tell them that you have a process and you walk them through the steps at the very beginning and then dive deeper, they're going to respect you as a professional.
Or not. And if
Or
they
not,
don't, go away from me.
and then you don't want to work with them because
Don't wanna work
that's
with
bad
them.
business.
It's bad business. And so, the thing is, the older man who was standing in the back saying, this is going to return us to a level of professionalism. It's going to stop those buyers from bullying us again. Because that's what they've been doing. They have been bullying us. Just show me that house. I just want to see that house. I don't care whether I don't care whether what your schedule is. I don't care what any of that is. Just open that door and let me go in. Really, enough of that, letting them treat us this way. I hate that they treat you this way. I hate that I hear the stories of, I showed them 35 houses, and then they had their sister write the offer.
Right.
Understand too, if you want, understand as well, buyer's agreements can be used differently. They can be for one house, they can be for one day, they can be for Joliet. You can have an exclusive buyer's agreement for Joliet, and at the same time have one for Naperville. So it's, people think, someone said, well, can I have it for all of Illinois? I said, you going to Decatur to show them houses in Decatur? They said, no, well then you shouldn't have it for them because you don't want to go to you got to think about what your field of expertise is as well when you're doing this. How do you want to be known to be able to do this? But it's going to cut the wheat from the, it's going to sort out the serious from the non-serious.
And like
here.
Carrie said, when you do it up front and people expect it right up front, then you can see right away whether they're serious
Set
or
the
not.
tone.
But the problem is if you go down the path and then bring it up, I think that's
Yeah,
what
just
causes an issue.
insist that we're going to have, I'm sorry, and here's one policy you can have. My policy is that I meet with everyone that I'm going to show property to. As long as you consistently do that with everyone, there's nobody preventing you from doing that. My policy is that I have a 20 to 30 minute meeting with everyone that I'm going to open the door for on a piece of property. And if someone says, well, whose policy is that? Here's my favorite line. Well, it's my policy.
Right.
Look at that. It's my policy.
And in fact, you can offer, just like us attorneys, we offer everybody a free consultation, right?
Yeah.
And you can offer a free consultation, and that's even a kind of an interesting thing to do, because you're saying that you're implying that anything outside of that consultation is something that they're going to have to pay for. And so you offer a free consultation where you sit down with them, you explain to them what you can do, and maybe talk to them about the market or whatever it is that you want to talk to them about, and see if you're a good fit for them. And that's all a consultation really is.
It's the same thing
When
the
somebody
mortgage
comes to
does.
see me for a free consultation, it's not 30 minutes of free legal advice. It's, do we have a good fit together? Is it something that I'm comfortable taking? Is it something they're comfortable taking? Working with me, are they interested in my proposal as to what it would cost for me to represent them? And then if it doesn't work out, we part ways. And if it works out, then they sign a retention agreement. And you guys can do the exact same thing.
Okay, first, second, third.
What keeps concerning me, getting back to the whole compensation issue on it, is if the sellers are not offering a co-op, the buyers are unable to negotiate into the contract any sort of credits for payment.
Right.
Am I correct to understand then the last option is you have to present to your buyers that they're going to have to pay you?
Very
nice.
Okay, so how do we soften that? Because historically, from a seller's standpoint, yes, they're paying this huge commission, but it comes out of their proceeds. It's not out of pocket, upfront, extra cash that they may not have. How do you present this whole new thing to a buyer, particularly young first-time buyers who are
I
really
would say,
cash to
like,
get
from
paid?
our side, because they always ask, well, how much money do I have to bring to closing, right? That's the biggest question they ask, is like, I've heard it's $10,000 or $15,000 of closing costs. And you're like, well, wait a second, that's not really true. And you explain what it is, and they're gonna get a real estate tax credit from the seller,
Right.
which they don't even know about most of the time. And so when you actually show them and say, okay, you have to pay this whatever thing you've signed an agreement with your realtor for, you just put it in as part of it. But for younger buyers, first-time home buyers, and I didn't want to just pass it out, there's so many programs now at different income levels where they're getting down payment assistance and grants. There's more than that out there now. Like, there's things you can actually layer some of the incentives together, and it's like, I was talking to a couple of people before the meeting, it's anywhere from like $3,000 to like $30,000 they can get as these credits and down payment assistance. So again, some are income limitations, some are even for move-out buyers too. But when you're talking to a client about that as a lender, they're always like, well, how much is it, because I heard this. And then when you actually show them what it all is, a lot of times it's less than they expected to be, by a decent amount, specifically because of the real estate tax credit. And then like, they don't even know that initial $1,000 goes towards their purchase. A lot of times they have no idea what credits they're getting, besides a credit from the seller. So
But-
I think-
Quite honestly, they may have to buy a different house.
And
Here's the brutal truth, they may have to buy a different house, just like because they can't afford this house,
And-
they have to afford
But they
this
might have
house.
like
Hold
their
on.
parents telling them you have to put 20% down. We always put 20%
You gotta-
down. And then you're like, no, you don't.
So you
have
need to educate them, but the truth of the matter is, they may have to buy a different house.
But it-
Life is hard sometimes.
at least for now, though, I think that the fee has to appear on the master.
Yes, it does.
It has to appear under
Yes.
guidelines.
It will, yes.
So it's going to have to still,
So
it's
you
out of
know.
pocket, but it still has to appear on the master. Maybe marked as paid outside of closing, but it still has to appear on the master. So it's going to factor in, everybody's going to see it.
Do they need a receipt?
Two. I'm sorry, I
Do
don't
you
know.
have to show a receipt? If it appears on the master, does there have to be?
There'll be you need an invoice for anything that's on the master.
Well, it'd sort of be like your cash to close, how much money you have to bring to closing, and it's on there. And so it's just whatever
Okay,
that
then I'm
fee
gonna go
is.
back. Okay,
Yeah, I just wanted to say, it's probably already been said, but this is an opportunity, as Deborah pointed out, to see the people that you really don't want to work with because they don't value you. And
Yes.
it's the hard conversation to have, but it's the thing you need to do, the one thing you need to do, the elephant in the room that's going to separate you. And actually, it's the law of attraction, right? The more you're going to establish your value and educate your clients, the more you're going to attract people who value enough. It's not the people that
And,
will
and,
sign
all,
it.
and, all,
that are
and all
the
their friends, because like if they're usually hanging out, they have
That's
value
right.
to you.
The people
Most
that
of their
will-
friends are going to have
The people that will sign
value.
the agreement are not the problem. It's almost superfluous. You got them to sign it, it's not about them, it's about the people that won't sign it. And the thing is, we're also at fault if we don't educate our clients And I'm actually usually dumbfounded by people that I assume understand, people sophisticated, worldly. Yesterday, I had a
Yeah,
friend.
just because you're a doctor doesn't mean you know anything about this stuff.
That's right. I had a friend
Right.
call me up yesterday about a home that she thinks is gonna go up for sale. It's an REO on her block. And she said, do you have any buyers? And I said, well, I don't think so at the moment. I said, but do they have a listing agent? And she said, oh, I don't know. Do you think I should call the other brokers I know in the neighborhood? And I said, well, I said, yeah. I said, so I just wanted to explain. There's a listing agent and there's a buyer's agent. She said, oh, I don't really know about that. And I said, wow, I haven't done my job. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. Sophisticated owner of $1 million home does not understand.
It's the same thing as the lenders. You like sometimes make assumptions. You're like, boy, they honestly,
Right.
you would think they know, but they don't.
I also think the average buyers and sellers don't understand how we get paid.
Right, I would
So
agree.
we need to teach them. I mean, all of this is an education thing. We had a question in the back, was in the back. All right, you've been patiently waiting.
Thank you.
Sally. Sally.
So I'm wondering, or actually I'm assuming that any contracts that we have now that are either exempt or in the private listing network, do we need to go back and renegotiate those contracts?
You do not. Anything that is written after the Halloween memo, you're gonna have to talk to your sellers. Anything you take after that, you'll have to offer the options to the sellers, but you do not have to go backwards.
But we need to let them know, don't you think? I mean,
Up to
because
you. Talk to your managing broker. I'm just gonna say
But the
that.
interesting,
Talk to
once
them.
that listing agreement expires, then what happens?
If you're, then the world has changed. If it expires, the world has changed. Notify them. Talk to your managing broker. I'm not gonna give you that advice.
okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I think the worst case scenario is we get to a situation, I have a two-part question. You get to a situation where they can't, you're under contract and you figure out they don't have the 2.5% to pay you. Or the 1% or whatever it's short.
Thank you.
Okay? So it almost like when I talk to a lender now, I have to understand upfront on the pre-approval. I have them an agency. Do they have the extra 3% to pay me?
Yes, because here's the sad
And
thing.
the lender should
and
understand that based on when you sign the agreement to factor that into their closing
Right.
costs.
Because I do mean to scare you about this. This is the scariest thing I'm gonna tell you. 5 houses. Pay co-op commission, no co-op commission, no co-op commission, no co-op commission. You're showing 5 of them in a day. You have no buyer's agreement. You get to that one in the middle. Can you say, I don't want to show you that house because I'm not getting paid on that house?
No.
Not under Illinois law. You have to show them that. Do you have to take them, if they decide to buy that house, do you have to take them to closing? You do.
You do.
And when you go to the closing table and put your hand out and say, could someone pay me something for that work? No one's gonna put any money in your hand.
But what about with the buyer's agreement in that situation?
In a buyer's
So
agreement,
I say to them,
if
they're
you-
paying 0, this is where
You
my
are going to
buyer's
pay
agreement
me X
pays.
number of dollars.
Ahead of
to
time.
something. But that has to be, well, you can even in desperate times, you can even have that conversation with them then. But if they say, no, I'm not signing that buyer's agreement, you still have to show them the house. So it's so much better to have that conversation with them at Starbucks over here than it is to standing in front of a door saying, do I want to unlock this door or do I not? Hold on a minute, that was your first question. You got a second one.
You got my second question, you read my mind, essentially. But still, the numbers are fluid in the situation. You don't get your final numbers until 24 hours before a closing. Now I'm short, $1,000, $2,000, whatever. Who's going to collect that?
All right, that's a very good question, because I'm going to tell you another scary thing. If you don't collect at closing, which Jeffrey says we can figure out how to collect at closing, but say for some reason you don't collect at closing, this is not a pro standards issue at this point. It's not like you two are mad at each other about a commission, so you go to pro standards and settle it this way. It's just like if a seller does you wrong, you don't go to pro standards to get the seller to give you the money that did you wrong. You understand that? This is a civil matter, so that your company would have to go civilly to that buyer and collect the money that way. So one of the things that's going to happen is the companies are going to have to get meaner to collect the money. And in the past, I don't want to collect the money because we might get a bad reputation that we're meanie people that don't collect the money, which made me furious. You know what? Collect the money. Your people earn the money, collect the money. let's hope a lot of it will be in small claims, it'll be easy money to collect. One of my friends said a lot of times it's, thank you Jeffrey, it's a mean lawyer letter that start, a mean lawyer letter will kind of work to get some of that money for you. But you want to work toward getting that money before closing.
And the lender should be, like even right now, right, new Cook County bills are up, right? So now you're figuring tax credits and so on. You should work with people, attorneys and lenders that understand that, can actually give an accurate number. Like it's plus or minus, let's say $500 or $1,000, depending on what day you have to make closing. But you should be reading the contract, because you actually show on your contract, usually either you or in the attorney's period, what the proration is on the taxes too. So like if people aren't looking at that, or not looking at the fact that, hey, have a buyer's agreement, that has to be factored into your closing cost, whatever that percentage is, that's just a lender that's going to cause problems at your closing, because they're going to say, we don't have the funds to close,
Can I
or
just
they
ask
won't even
one
be able to get
follow-up
their
on that?
closing.
No, we're already 10 minutes over, so I'm gonna tell you that, I'm gonna let my guests, if they can, we could have 2 hours on this, we could have 4 days on this. And unfortunately, some of the answers to some of these questions are, beats me, don't know yet. Every day, it's like a little bit more information dribbles out. When the judge decides or the jury decides what the answer is going to be, that will be an interesting day too. So stay tuned, more to come. That's what I'm going to say. We're giving you the best information we have at the moment that we have, trying to figure out as best as we can. Thank you. That was so nice of you to say. Say it loud so everybody can hear that.
I think it's terrific.
Thank you so much. Guys, thank you, Jeffrey.